I ain't no suit wearing businessman like you. You know, I'm just a gangster, I suppose, and I want my corners.
Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Five Corners Podcast. I am Jet Bonifay, and on the other line, he wishes they would stop showing Bulls versus Knicks highlights. It's Ace Merluza. What's up, man?
What up? Hoping that changes next week. Shout out to all the moms out there.
Shout out.
Happy Mother's Day to our wives and our moms and our lulas and aunties.
Good deal. That's right. Special guest, and actually, it's a special announcement. We have decided to make Maersk a permanent fixture on the Five Corners Podcast. Welcome, brother, officially. Not that we didn't want you around, but officially now.
Thank you. I appreciate the sentiment. I'm very thankful to you guys, and hopefully this is the sign of great things moving forward.
Yeah, man. The more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, now we just got to find someone who grew up in between Danforth and Montgomery Street.
we cover all of Jersey.
Yeah, I've
all
got
Jersey now is covered.
Every corner, baby.
Every corner, baby. That's right. All five of them. All right. So we'll just jump right into it. And I think we alluded to a little bit in our conversation before we started recording that, you know, Ace was mentioning this is probably the one that's, you know, the most relatable to us because it was in our teen years. And I think we were all huge basketball fans at that point. It wasn't like, you know, you had these scraps of memories. This is like when we were fully formed as like teenagers and watching these games and watching ESPN. So I think the mentality for us was this was how we knew the Bulls, you know, from our own memories. So Ace, I guess we can start it off. What are your, you know, biggest remembrances of the Bulls during this timeline?
Well, the comeback, you know, I remember exactly where I was when he played his first game versus the Pacers. And one big takeaway for me was when Jordan announced his first retirement. You know, I remember the day after going into school, I had an extra pep in my step because, well, I mean, the reality was the window of opportunity to actually win was there for us. So that for me was my biggest takeaway to start tonight.
It's always good to hear from guys that are like waiting for Jordan to like stop playing basketball to finally get their chance. Reggie Miller kind of said it at the last part of the second episode, but he was just like, "All right, Michael's almost gone. It's
exactly.
time for us to grab the brass ring."
Yeah, it's my time to retire.
Yeah, exactly. What about you, Maris?
Well, starting with episode 7, I think it got serious real quick because it talked about the death of his father. And there was relating how Mike was feeling at that time. You never saw a superstar of that magnitude kind of go through something that we would all go through. Like, it was real. I mean, losing a loved one, especially your dad, is one of the things that'll cut your heart out. And I think we learned a lot about his resolve and just kind of how he's turning his mentality that was brought down from his parents about turning a negative into a positive, and how he was looking at life at that time. I've seen the ESPN 30 for 30 Jordan Rides the Bus. I think this was a good microcosm of that particular episode about how he coped with his father's death, and it was great insight into how that carried into the next 3 championships, or at least a direct effect on that first one from the second three-peat.
Yeah, and I think they began foreshadowing us during the last episode about how, you know, he was already so mentally and physically exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, to your point about, you know, losing your father, especially in that tragic of a way, right? I mean, it was such a brutal way to lose a family member. But I think it was definitely another thing that pushed him over the edge, and he basically lost his motivation at that point to keep going because, you know, his whole goal was, I just needed to have one more than Mike and I'm sorry, Magic and Larry, and he got that, right? So I think it made it difficult for him to find, again, to your point, more motivation to continue playing. You know, he feels like he'd already gotten to the mountaintop, and then now he lost his dad, and I think that's really, you know, put him in that point where he's like, I don't need basketball at this point anymore.
Yeah, and he even mentioned it, right? Like during the Summer Olympics, he kind of hinted at wanting to kind of move away or, shock the world, make history, alluding to baseball, right?
Yep.
But like to your point, he wanted to go for that three-peat. So it was already on his mind, moving on to baseball. And I think, well, it's clear now that the murder of his father kind of pushed him towards retirement. It was like the deciding factor that ultimately made him committed fully to baseball. And plus, his dad always wanted him to play baseball. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So do you guys remember where you were when that first announcement was, or the rumors of the impending Jordan retirement? Do you guys remember that?
Yeah, it was first few weeks of school in seventh grade. I mean, I remember reading the newspapers, and I can't believe I'm saying reading the newspapers, and there were like whispers about, Jordan wanting to walk away and all the stuff surrounding the aftermath of his father passing. And it was kind of cool to see, what went down during that White Sox game, the leak to the news outlets and how big of a deal it was. So it kind of made everyone kind of warm and hip to what was coming, and it was pretty cool to see how much media showed up for that press conference.
What about you, Maris? Do you remember specifically that announcement?
I don't. So I hadn't really started watching Sports Center, or I wasn't watching sports as much as I would have probably up until after 95. I was only keeping up with the Knicks in general, but of course this was a big thing. But I do remember how I found out. It's I think I was practicing in my backyard, and my dad comes up to me and says, "Oh, no, no more Jordan," and I'm like, I'm like, he died? No, no, he's retiring. I was like, what? And then I think I had a I had a Nick moment that said, "Oh, maybe Patrick's gonna get a ring now." That was the extent of, I think, what I thought about it at the time. Not really thinking about the impact. I think at that time I was like, yeah, he's like 30. He should retire already. He's got three championships. Not not without the hindsight that 30 is still young, and you know what he did hadn't been done by anybody since the Celtics, or that the Bulls hadn't done anything since those Celtics teams three-peating. So it was kind of, as a 12, 13-year-old kid at that time, you're just kind of a, oh, that sucks. What's for dinner?
So mine was a little. It's similar to yours, but obviously I'm looking at it from a Michael Jordan fan perspective.
Yeah.
I remember, this, Ace. My dad is a huge Knicks fan. So he was gloating. It wasn't just like a matter of fact statement for him. He was like, "Oh, Michael Jordan is gone from the league." And it's exactly what you were saying about. In his mind, it was like, "All right, it's time for the Knicks now to kind of take over," right? So he was basically rubbing it in my face that Michael Jordan was gone, and I remember just being completely heartbroken and going like, what do I do now? Like, who do I root for now? You know what I mean? Because it was so easy, right?
Yeah.
It's like kids now with LeBron or Steph Curry. It was so easy to idolize the guy. He was everything in basketball. So I was heartbroken, so much so that I started becoming a White Sox fan, not realizing he was in like double A league baseball. So he wasn't actually playing the majors. And I didn't realize that. I wasn't that big of a baseball fan. So I was completely like, oh, wait, he's not actually in these games. He's actually in games that are not televised. And it was funny because when they started showing like all the people, flocking to the Barons games, I was like, oh, okay. So nobody used to go to these things until Michael Jordan started playing baseball. So I thought that was pretty hilarious.
That narrative is interesting too. That they originally sent the people that are starting out to single A, but the press boxes wouldn't hold the volume of press that Michael would conduct. So they had to put him in double A
Isn't that crazy?
for that alone.
Yeah, you got a bump up, you got a promotion strictly because they couldn't fit the number of reporters into the press boxes.
That's nuts to me.
It's nuts. It's like a typical Jordan thing. You know what I do remember vividly though was, and again, I wasn't following as closely, so I didn't realize he actually had a good initial outing, that he was actually a relatively productive baseball player. All I heard was what the media was kind of portraying, which was he was kind of terrible. There was this huge backlash about how dare this guy think he could come and play baseball at the level that Major League Baseball players can. You guys remember any of that stuff from back in the day?
Yeah, I don't remember how good he started, but I do know that he was putting his all into the game, and Reinsdorf during the documentary alluded to how he very well could have made it to the majors. You know, if he continued to play, if he continued to remain committed, which he was, he worked very hard. And I think with his coming back, it was a result of a perfect storm of a lot of things. And one thing I totally forgot about was the work stoppage, in Major League Baseball, replacement players. Like, I totally forgot about that. And he wasn't about to accept being a replacement player, despite of it meaning he will be in the major leagues. But, what kind of validation do you get from being in the major leagues as a replacement player?
A scab,
So
basically.
exactly. So with the work stoppage and, the Bulls struggling during that 1995 season, it was just a perfect storm for him to come back to the game at that point.
So it's funny the timeline of things that happen. When I keep talking about alternate universes, the whole timeline, if you think about it, is a real alternate universe type of timeline that they go through. So he's already thinking. So let's start it with this, and then if I ramble, just let me know. Mike starts off already thinking with his dad that he's gonna retire and do the baseball thing. And to answer your question, Jet, I was I wasn't keeping tabs on how he was doing with baseball. I was just excited that another big athlete was doing another sport. Like I was a big fan of Bo Jackson, I was a big fan of Deion Sanders, just because they could play multiple sports and just kind of show that you didn't have to stay in that box of one sport. But anyway, so the timeline is weird because he's already thinking about retiring and playing baseball with his dad,
Sure.
right? And the way they portray it in the documentary, him being kind of the challenge of basketball kind of being over, so to speak, he's gonna go do it anyway, probably. And then his father passes away and kind of pushes that narrative forward. And then then he's going into baseball. And then during that, like we said, he's doing well. Then he starts facing curveballs and stuff, and he has to adjust to that. And then he starts catching up to that. And then the baseball strike happens. Now, think about this real quick. What if his dad never passes away? And what if there's never a baseball stoppage?
Mm-hmm.
He's going to make it to the major leagues, like Reinsdorf said. In that alternate timeline, we wouldn't probably be thinking of Michael Jordan as the greatest basketball player ever. Can you imagine that real quick?
Yeah.
So he's only got those 3 chips. He's never top 10 in scoring. He's never had another three-peat to hoist his greatness on. He doesn't have 6. He only has 3. That's LeBron.
Yeah.
If we're talking in terms of championships,
Exactly.
that's what LeBron has now. And guess who's ascending the top as the greatest player of all time?
Yep. It'll be LeBron easily,
It'll
right?
be, yeah.
Yeah.
It's so weird to think about that.
But think about what Ace kind of alluded to a little bit, right? He was at a 202 in 2 months coming from basketball. I mean, again, it's still double A, but he went from, playing the finals game and hitting a 202 in double A. So to the point that we're making about, not only does he have the physical tools to be able to play, to Maersk's point, but he also has the mental, toughness, the mental determination to be able to work out. I mean, he basically told Grover, he's like, yeah, turn me into a baseball player.
Yeah.
Right? And that was the fun part about this episode too, is, I love me a training montage. And to me, there's no better trainer. It's like Rocky, right? Go chase the chickens. But this is Tim Grover saying, he was a basketball player. I got to turn him into a baseball player. So yeah, you're right, Marisk. It's like his willingness to play this sport and the ability to do that physically and mentally completely changed the landscape. Again, if he still had baseball to play, he wouldn't have called up BJ Arm. And that, what it was, right? He was bored. He was like,
Yeah.
I got nothing to do. Let me call BJ and let me shoot some hoops.
Yeah, because it was like that challenge of baseball that he was so looking forward to was taken away, and there's really nothing you could do about it if it's that deep in a strike for baseball.
Right.
And what is the competitive mindset of Michael Jordan going to do? He's going to play golf, but you know,
Not enough.
realistically, yeah, he's going to play golf, but realistically, it's not enough. He needed to quench his thirst for that challenge, so that's what he did.
Any thoughts, Ace, on that one?
I think after watching episode 7 and 8, you saw how competitive he was. You saw how he held his teammates to a standard. And when you're left with no competition and no teammates, and you saw how well he bonded with his baseball teammates, and I like learning about how his teammates in baseball treated him like he wasn't an icon, despite of the fact that he clearly was, and there was a circus that followed him. So that was cool to see. I mean, Jordan was a different breed. He was a different beast. So yeah, it just propelled him to new heights in his career. And to your point about the training, I love how he essentially had to go back and reconfigure his body towards basketball.
So, one of the other things I wanted to touch on while Jordan was playing baseball was how good that Bulls team was without him, at least the first year, right? I think we all know that losing Horace Grant was probably the reason they didn't do as well that second season. But that first season was, I think, an insight into, and we talked about this a little bit on the last pod, how good a well-running triangle offense actually is. And I think without Michael Jordan, and I hate to say this, without guys like Carmelo Anthony who stop the ball, that type of player, a facilitator type of player, like a Pippen, possibly a LeBron, right, fits in very well because it does give every person that touches the ball options in that offense. And I think they showed it there. I think to me, that's a testament to not only Pippen being a facilitator, but to Phil Jackson and Tex Winter architecting that program, right?
Right. And Jeff Van Gundy has even gone on record in saying that he has never seen the triangle run as efficiently and as crisply as he had seen during the 1994 season. And for me, that kind of validates the win versus the Bulls that year, because they were very good. They won 55 odd games, and Steve Kerr alluded to enjoying the residual effects of having won the championship before, and the team, sans Jordan, was still entirely intact. So it's true. I watch those Bulls playoff games often during that summer after they lost, because that's really the only thing I could hang my hat on, those games. And it's true, they did run those sets perfectly. And in retrospect, having learned more about the triangle, like 10 years down the line and looking back at it, it's true. It was fun to watch.
That Bulls team still took us to 7 games, which is still to this day still amazing. But you get an answer as to why. It's the facilitation of Scottie Pippen suits that triangle, like we've been saying, suits that triangle offense better. And I think with Michael not being there, everybody else's role bumps up a little bit, and they know that they can take their shots when they need to. And I think everyone's confidence grew from that season. Now, what stinks is that management couldn't hang on to Horace Grant for the next season, and they kind of go down south, which is kind of why they were all clamoring back for Michael. But you see, even if we go back, if we go to that 94-95 Bulls team where Michael comes back at the end. The Orlando series, Michael's still averaging a crazy amount. I think they just suffered from a lack of defense and rebounding, someone to guard Shaq, and just a tired Michael. But I think there's a confidence from the '94 team that had carried over, but what was lacking now at that point was Horace Grant and the defense.
Yeah, and I think to the point you made about the emergence of guys, right? Obviously, Pippen as a facilitator, you started seeing some of those flashes while Michael was still around, but this really became full form into that when he left. But at the same time, Tony Kukoc was the perfect, complement in that offense, right? Here's a guy that's a long 3-point shooting big guy that can pass. I mean, he was a 6'11" guy. I mean, he's a prototypical, 3 and D. Well, maybe not D, but certainly 3 and pass. He was the guy in that offense, right? So I think, again, to Merck's point, it's almost like you're leveling up everybody else while Michael Jordan is doing his little hiatus thing, and it really sparks the fire that rolls right into that 72-10 team. Again, to Merck's point, once they got that critical piece of the defense and rebounding, which was Rodman, it now became an unstoppable juggernaut again, right?
Yep. Yeah, because not only did you shore up your defensive shield, your hammer comes back when Michael Jordan.
Right. And on top of that, I think they said it, right? The fact that they did lose to the Magic, that Nick Anderson did steal the ball from Michael Jordan in those key possessions, in that key possession, I think that fueled the mental fire, which led to, again, Michael Jordan turning into apex predator Michael Jordan again, right?
Right. And I wanted to bring up some big differences between the Michael Jordan-led teams and the Scottie Pippen-led teams. Now, what they gained in cohesion offensively, they lost in leadership. And what you had in Pippen and Jordan were two very different leadership styles, right?
Yeah.
Great point.
They alluded to the fear factor of Michael Jordan. Michael would bludgeon everyone around him, whereas you had Scottie, who was the nurturer. He would slap your butt, tell you everything's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that moment where he sat out, that final play where Kukoc hit that game-winning shot, that ultimately killed their chance to beat the Knicks.
Great point.
And that is a testament to his lack of leadership. And Bill Cartwright called him out after the game, and Michael Jordan even called right after the game, because it's unlike Scottie. And Michael saw that, and I'm sure he was thinking, that's not a good look. And it surely wasn't, because as the lead guy, you got to set an example, and that was not a good example. And that is why they lost, and that's what they needed to get back more than anything from Michael Jordan.
And I think, and you capped it off perfectly there. I think that, again, dovetails into the story of him during these practices. I think that's the other through line, besides, Jordan's father, obviously. But the other through line was, you're exactly right, Ace. He ruled with an iron fist, but he said it, right? Winning has a price. And that price is not being the nice guy on the team. I can't be the guy that tells you everything's going to be okay. What was a great insight, and, I made the comment again on the last pod that Michael Jordan wasn't a good mentor. Well, actually, the Scotty Burrell story this week was, a complete refuting of that, right? Is that he was trying to be a mentor. It's just, you're right, Ace. He's not the pat your butt type of guy and go, hey, everything's going to be okay. It's going to be like, no. Iron sharpens iron. And the only way to do this is by me forcing it out of you. It's just Scott Burrell is just not that type of guy, right? Now, it's funny because I think he got more respect out of Kerr, the fact that Kerr went at him. I don't think Michael ever respected Scotty Burrell like that, because he never came back at Michael the same way that Steve Kerr did during that incident when they fought, right?
Yeah, and I think he wanted to elicit that response from him, and
yeah.
I like those sound bites, like towards Scotty, like, hey, where's your mouth now, homie? You ready today? Right?
Yeah.
But he was just a nice guy. But Michael knew that they ultimately needed Scott Burrell in the end, and he performed, but he just didn't bring his game individually to the levels that he thought Mike, he being Michael, thought he could.
And Scotty Burrell only lasted that 1 year with the Bulls, apparently, because I think it shows that he was only there for that championship, that third championship team. But the through line there was very nostalgic for me because at that time, I was playing high school basketball for the Hudson Catholic Hawks.
Oh
Sorry, guys.
boy. Oh boy.
All right, you're off the pod, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, man.
2/3 prep guys here, man. Be careful.
Yeah.
But no, so at that time, I was still playing at a relatively competitive level in Jersey City high school basketball, and that's how it was. Like, you'll ask Jeff Almignana, ask Jeff Almignana, ask anybody else that is playing high school basketball at that point in time in Jersey City, and they'll tell you there's the one dude that was Michael Jordan on our team. It wasn't me at that point. But that's what we kind of had to do as the leader at that point in time, because there wasn't a nurturer for basketball. At least I didn't think there, like, or in just in competitive sports in general at that point, because a senior year in high school, if you're playing any type of competitive sport, they're looking to get you to the next level, or they're just gonna sit you down.
Right.
Because at that point they know whether or not you're gonna go somewhere or not. But I think the motivation factor that they portray Michael as, that's common in sports, and I know that's not the attitude that a lot of the kids have now.
Right.
And I think when they're watching the documentary, some of them are going to be like, "Wow, Michael Jordan was an a-hole." But you don't get, like he says, you don't get 6 championships without having to motivate your team a certain way, or at least you don't get 3 and then another 3 in a row. Because I know that Steve Kerr also alluded to playing on the Spurs teams, and it was a totally different mindset, and they still won championships. But yeah, they never repeated. They won here and there. They created their dynasty kind of out of scrapping together a bunch of championships at different points in time in the early aughts. But they didn't do it like the Bulls did.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on exactly what you're saying about, think about how much of a controversy it was when Jimmy Butler went to the Wolves, right? Of him calling out. I mean, he didn't punch it. Imagine the headlines now if somebody was to say that they punched their teammate during a practice. I mean, this was, again, maybe it's showing our age here, guys, but I agree with you, Maris. This was normal basketball practice for us, Ace. I mean, you remember even in grammar school, we were being treated this way, right? The coaches were doing this to you. Other teammates were doing this to you. So yeah, it might be indicative of a generational gap now where people think that this is controversial, but you're right, Maris. This is the way that players dealt with each other. This was policing within your own team and trying to get the best out of them. I mean, you hear about the stories about Karl Anthony Towns, Andrew Wiggins, right? And, basically Jimmy Butler's like, no, I'm on the other team. I'm going to show these guys that I don't need these two to win because they're not as motivated as I am. So you're right. I think there's a difference in mindset now relative to the way that, players handle being coached and being teammates with, it's a much more collegial, friendly league than it was adversarial and confrontational, right?
Right. And who's to say what we don't see behind closed doors? But outwardly, that's exactly what we're seeing, is that everyone's cordial, everyone's friends, this and that. There's a competition level there, obviously, but it's nowhere near
Yeah.
to what we were used to in the late 90s, maybe early aughts.
Right. And, winning in leadership has a price. I like that. I have to repeat that. And as Michael said, if that meant he had to get in your ass, pause, then so be it.
But I think he knew what the price was, right? They showed the clips of him getting thrown around like a rag doll during the bad boy Pistons era. And he knew that in order to overcome that Pistons team, they had to be both mentally and physically tougher. And I think he demanded that from everybody else now that started to come after that hill that they climbed, right? So he became their version of the bad boy Pistons. And I think it's we talk about this a lot, but these guys are geniuses of basketball. He knew exactly what needed to get done. To Marsk's point, other teams could not put something like this together, a run like this together. And a lot of it has to do with you try to find another gear in your teammates. And unfortunately, the way to do it is show, and he said it, right? I'm not willing to ask you to do something I would not do. And they showed him
So perfect.
running suicides, right? This is Michael, the best player on the entire globe. And he's running faster at every suicide than all of his teammates. That tells you something, right? You know, they a notorious breakfast club where they would wake up at 6 a.m. and weight lift before practice.
You know who I thought about during that stretch of the doc tonight's episode? Kwame Brown. I know it's beyond Last Dance era, but poor Kwame Brown, man. You know, now I'm beginning to understand the impact and the mental trauma that he had to endure while not only playing for the guy that drafted for you, but playing with him. I mean, God rest his soul.
And again, this goes back to it's generational, right?
Yeah.
This is a guy who's coming out, and this is the way Michael Jordan does things. And this is a kid, probably because, you know, at that point, high school players were getting a lot of press, and he'd never been treated this way. Then, like you said, Ace, he's getting, you know, yelled at every practice. I mean, do you remember when Malik Monk did something stupid during the game, and Michael Jordan, the
Mike
owner,
slapped him in the back of the head.
Michael Jordan slaps him in the back of the head. So it's still in him.
Yeah.
This is his mentality. That's how you become Michael Jordan.
Well,
There's no way around it.
I think also with the insight of tonight's episodes, you kind of don't feel that Michael Jordan, the owner, or Michael Jordan, the GM, really wasn't his fault. The kids he drafted aren't like the kids that got drafted when he was playing. I think if you're trying to do that now, like that, the techniques of motivation that Michael had done with the Bulls before to the kids now, they're gonna say, "I'm gonna take my money and go."
Right.
I mean, I hate to say that, but it's true. I think it's true.
Yeah, it's a player empowerment league, man. You can't treat your players like that anymore. They're much more powerful. But to that point, though, it brings back those stories about that LeBradford Smith game, right?
Oh, I love this story.
The guy scored 36.
I love this story.
Me too. And you know, to hear them talk about like, okay, he found ways to motivate himself even with the slightest of slights. I mean, this was a guy who, again, he made it up completely, but the fact that the guy scored 36 points in Michael Jordan's mind was a complete slight to him. The word indignation, you know, the fact that he got scored on, to him, he had to make something up in order to be able to motivate him. I think that's a real telling tale of the guy's mentality.
You know what? I never heard of LeBradford Smith.
Me neither.
Until they mentioned him tonight.
I had so I follow and it's not House of Hoops. It was you know, one of the YouTube highlight channels, and they had that game on there before, and they didn't tell the story the way they told it in the episodes, but I had an idea about it when I was watching it tonight, and then when it's hilarious because I think the way that Michael motivated himself by making that story up that LeBradford Smith said nice game after, and it wasn't nothing like, you know, if someone said nice game to me, nice game, I'll move on. But Michael Jordan said, this MF said nice game to me after dropping 37 on me. Are you kidding?
Not just nice game, Mike.
Nice game, Mike. Oh,
nice game,
God.
Mike.
But it's funny because I think you'll hear stories of other players doing that too. I think Shaq infamously said David Robinson didn't say hi to me during like this one time I'm gonna dunk on him during like the All-Star game. And then when you come like years later, when you ask him about that story, no, I made that up. It's hilarious because David Robinson didn't corroborate the story. He's like, I never did that to him.
But it makes sense though, right? It's an 82 game season.
Mhm.
Right? We've all talked about how long the season is, right? Like baseball and basketball, they're two of the longest seasons in professional sports. You have to find ways to not get bored. And I'm sure being the top guy, being the great white shark of the NBA pool, you needed to have something to motivate you. And if that meant making up a story about a guy who scored 36 points and he said, "Hey, good game, Mike," I think that's what Michael Jordan had to do. And he felt like that's what he needed to do. And it's funny because BJ Armstrong, who knew Michael Jordan, who played with him day in and day out during practice, he did like the worst cardinal sin you could do against a guy, right? Which is to trash talk him on his home floor. Like he should know better than that. And I get it. You know, you had a hot game, but don't poke the bear, right?
Don't go against the family. You're still alumni. You know, don't go against the family. And I totally forgot B.J. Armstrong was on the Hornets, by the way.
How about the Del Curry cameo?
Oh,
Papa
yeah.
Curry.
Yeah, I forgot B.J. Armstrong was on the Hornets too. The only other team I thought B.J. Armstrong played for was the Warriors.
Yeah. That's the only team I remember him playing for after the Bulls.
Do you guys, so going back to him kind of returning back to the game, do you guys remember that first game back, that first Pacers game back? I know I certainly do.
I have it on tape.
Yeah, I did. I was at my sister's house when they were living in Cater Avenue in Greenville. Shout out to Greenville.
Shout out to Greenville.
The one, Maris' Hood. The one play I remember fondly was just that swooping one-handed like finger roll.
I think that's
stuck with me.
Yeah, I think that's everybody's signature "I'm back" moment.
Yeah,
it was weird to see him in a 4-5, but when you saw, like Ace said, that swooping finger roll, you knew everything was right with the world.
Right.
I remember them losing, and I was like, it was weird. The whole thing was weird just because when he showed up wearing 4-5, I didn't know what the connotation of the number was yet. I was wondering why didn't you go, because it was just such an 45 was just an unsexy number. It's a baseball number, and it's Danny Tartable's number from the Yankees, who was my favorite player than the Yankees back then. But it's such an unsexy basketball number, and it was just weird. Him shooting 6 for 19 was weird. The finger roll was cool, but there was no dunk in that game too. So it was it was weird. And I remember taping it and just being disappointed rewatching it. And I think I never rewatched that game again. I kept it because back then I kept archives of everything. But I was just like, this was such a weird comeback game. And then the rest of the season happens.
So and I know you guys are going to remember this. What about the double nickel at MSG?
I don't remember that. Thanks, Chet.
Go ahead, Ace. Go.
Yeah, that's probably the perfect example of Michael Jordan exerting his will on a team, and unfortunately, it had to be against us. And I mean, Jeff Van Gundy, got to reference him. He to this day calls that the single most inhuman performance he's ever seen for a guy who's been playing baseball, hasn't played competitive basketball in more than a year and a half, to come out and drop 55 on a capably good team. He never called them a great team that season, but they were still sound defensively, and just still shred them and impose his will and administer the pain, as Michael Jordan would so eloquently say. And he didn't even beat us at the end with the last second shot. He passed it off to Bill Wennington. That hurt the most to me. I'm like, you got beat by a cutting Bill Wennington.
And he dunked it.
Dunked it. Come on.
I have a very specific.
He's Canadian.
There's some Canadian audience members now, man.
Oh my god. I have a very specific memory about this night. I'm watching this game on MSG, and I'm happy because Jordan's getting his due, but the Knicks are still in the game, and for a good amount of time they're winning the game. And Patrick Ewing is having an awesome game, and he says it in the documentary. Yeah, I had an awesome game, but nobody remembers that. Like, I remember it, Pat. I remember. And then I remember there's a vicious Scottie Pippen dunk over Charles Smith that nobody I don't think remembers.
No.
Also,
I don't remember.
but if you look it up, you're gonna be like, God dang.
No, thank
Anyway,
you.
but here's my specific memory. So my aunt, who immigrated to my cousins in Chicago first. So she was initially a Bulls fan because she had just immigrated there for the first championship, and then she came over to us in Jersey during the second and third Bulls championship. But she's still very much a Michael Jordan fan, and I had for some reason had fallen asleep during the game, and I had to do something that I forgot what it was. I think I had to get up early for a baseball game, so I had to go to sleep before the game ended. And I remember being mad because I was like, oh, I don't want to go to sleep. I want to see how this game ends. And then my aunt says, don't worry, I'll tell you. And my aunt she has this thing about her when it comes to the Bulls. So I woke up that morning with a note next to my bed. Michael Jordan scored 55 points. Patrick Ewing scored 35 points. The Bulls won by 2. Have a nice day, Mar- have a nice day, nephew. And I was just like, ah! I crumbled up that piece of paper and threw it in the garbage. And I was like, don't ever leave a note like that on my bed again.
Like, another example of the analog way we do things. Somebody left you a note.
Right.
Right. Exactly.
in Sharpie. So
Yeah,
it was a piece
Sharpie.
of loose leaf with Sharpie, as only a Filipino aunt would do.
I remember watching that and thinking to myself, he's not supposed to be doing this. I watched him versus the Pacers. How could he possibly be doing this to us? And why us? Why us?
And again, we talked about it a little bit during, again, the last pod. There's a mystique about Madison Square Garden. And I think it legitimizes his return if he performs well there. Michael Jordan is a performer, right? And Tim Grover was almost in tears talking about it. Michael Jordan, every time he stepped on the floor, felt like he owed everybody that watched him his absolute best performance. And I think Madison Square Garden is that best venue to display all of that. So, yeah, Ace, I think he dug deep in the well of Michael Jordan to come, because there's no way, you're right, that a guy being off that long from basketball should be able to drop 55 on a team like the Knicks. There's just no way. And again, that's just all mental. And I think that rode them right into that playoff series. And Maris, before you jumped on, Ace and I were kind of talking about it, like, going back to the sliding doors thing that we've kind of been harping on. Imagine if Penny Hardaway didn't get injured, right? Imagine if that team, constructed the way that they were, stayed generally whole, what the opportunities for that Magic team could have been. I mean, that to me is like a huge what if, because I love Penny Hardaway's game. He was, to me,
We all did, yeah.
right, Magic Johnson reincarnated.
Before LeBron.
Yeah, right. He was LeBron before LeBron, and he was like that, weird, non-prototypical 6'7" point forward type guy. And they had the perfect team to go up against them. But at the same thing, it's like Nick Anderson stealing the ball from Michael Jordan during that last second again became this moment in time where Michael's like, no, I'm coming back, apex predator Michael Jordan again.
Right. And Magic Shaq was arguably the most athletic and lithe I've ever seen him in his career.
The 95 Shaq was a beast. Like, I think that was like his best like looking year because it was he had the turnaround going. He had just that dominant like spin move, alley oop. It was all money on those all the time. But if you're going back to Penny Hardaway, there was 2 players in the 90s that were LeBron before LeBron for me. If you're not counting Scottie Pippen.
Horry.
Who?
Robert Horry.
No. 7 rings. Anyway.
Yeah.
It's Penny Hardaway and Grant Hill.
100%.
100.
Absolutely.
Grant Hill was my guy, and I wore 33 through sophomore and junior year of high school because of him and Patrick Ewing. But it's funny how parallel their careers went, because they're both dubbed the next this and the next that, and injuries just kind of sucked that dream out the window.
Yeah.
And it's Grant Hill pretty much recovered to being an all-star in 2005 it was, which is kind of a happy ending to his story. But Penny never got that back. I mean, he had a decent last hurrah in that 04 Knicks Nets series. I don't know if you've seen his stats in that series. He's 16, 7, and like 5 assists during those 3 sweep games. But it's weird. Again, in another alternate universe, like you said, if Hardaway never gets hurt, Horace Grant doesn't get hurt in that first game of the 96 series. I think it's a more competitive series at least. And if they keep that team together, if Shaq never signs with the Lakers, that's still the team Jordan's got to go through for
Yeah.
the next couple of years.
And they were the most, prototypical new age team, right? They had, Dennis Smith, they had Nick Anderson. Dennis Scott, sorry.
Yeah.
Dennis Scott and Nick Anderson, who could all shoot threes. And they had that inside-outside game that was very difficult to handle. You're constantly having a double Shaq, and those guys could hit perimeter threes the entire time. So I think you're right. I think all of these sliding doors moments changes the dynamic of what would have been Michael Jordan's path to his championships.
I just want to thank the Orlando Magic for motivating Michael to ultimately create the Jordan Dome. I mean, just seeing that today was just like
I love that.
amazing to see.
segue.
And I'm like, you give us Space Jam, which was awesome for the time, and I just love how they just constructed a training dome for him to like put in the work in and the weights and get some like legendary like runs with NBA players. And we all know about this. We've all heard about it, but to actually see the dome itself and more footage behind the scenes is pretty awesome. And Reggie Miller's insight into his schedule was like eye-opening too. I mean, it's inhuman. He had his call times, then he had to play pickup games till like 10, and then he still had to lift weights.
Yeah.
But that just goes back to Michael Jordan's like commitment and Tim Grover's commitment to him to reconfigure his body to becoming a basketball body, because it just wasn't there during the 1995 season, and no one expected it to be, right?
Yeah, I think the other part too is, like you said, Ace, those runs were legendary. I remember, and again, this will date us, but I used to get the Slam magazine, right?
Yeah.
Slam magazine had, and nowhere near the level of information that we had now. They just basically had a picture of that Jordan Dome, and they would basically just be saying, yeah, Patrick Ewing showed up today.
Yep.
Reggie Miller showed up today. In shape Juwan Howard showed up today. So it was just like these little tidbits of information. You're just like, what is going on there? Like you said, it's rare that a guy making a movie gets a whole gym built to him. It's also even more rare that professional NBA basketball players are showing up to play ball while the guy is on break from his movie. Yeah.
And shout out to LaSalle Thompson. He got more footage than I expected. Player development coach for the Knicks for the 2013 season. So shout out to him.
Way to run that circle back to the Knicks.
That's a deep cut, man.
That's what I do.
Only true Knicks tape dudes are gonna know that shit, bro.
That's what I do, baby.
That also goes to show the motivation Jordan had to just get back into shape, to have an entire dome just constructed for him in the middle of his takes with Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck.
Right.
But think about that today. We're in a COVID world where no one's playing any basketball right now by choice and not by choice. I'm pretty sure every NBA player is just itching to get back. But how much are you itching to get back? Because I think if this were Jordan in the era today, he would find a way to get his teammates together and practice. I think he would pay for everyone's tests. Make sure make sure they're testing them every day, but still wanting to maintain that edge for when the season can potentially resume. But no one's thinking that way right now, I don't think.
No. And you know, I made that post on our Facebook page about, you know, who are the top 10 guys who are going to get the most bloated between now and the restart of the season.
Just go back to 99, man. The lockout at 99.
Zion Williamson.
Oh my god.
I think my money's on Jokic, bros. I mean, I don't know about you, but that boy, it looks like he's already halfway down the hill. But you're right. Williamson is definitely in the top 3.
He plays for NOLA. That's all I got to say.
Oh, the
New
food
Orleans.
in NOLA. I miss New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
But
You been there, Jet?
No, not yet. I was supposed to, but you know, I was like, oh, I don't know. I'd rather go to Spain. So we ended up going to Spain instead.
All right. That's the last time I ask you anything about that. You been to New Orleans? No, I went to Spain.
I went.
Thanks, Jet. Thanks.
No, but listen, you're right about this, right? This is a very Jordan mentality. Again, it goes back to it's generational. These guys think that they can just pick it up and move right along. Meanwhile, Michael Jordan's like, no, I'm gonna sharpen the tools and I'm gonna come back and go hunting for bear when I come back. I mean, what they did to the league that year, and again, like you said, Ace, this was one of those years where we're paying attention now, right? We're actually watching ESPN. We're in the news. We're kind of, you know, keeping tabs of it. They ran roughshod across this league. I mean, it was like a whole different ball game.
Yep.
Nobody was even close. I mean, those 10 losses, I don't even remember them losing. I mean, 72 wins in this era of basketball is almost unheard of.
The Knicks beat them that year. That was one win. Handily, by the way. That's all I got to say.
I'm about to look this up.
Yeah,
with the 10 teams that they lost. Hold
yeah,
on.
go ahead. Yeah, let's pull that up because I think it's important for people to know how rare it was. I mean, Gary Payton said it, right? The Seattle SuperSonics also won against them, but for a team without a dominant center, that was the other key part, guys. Right? This was the '90s. Having a dominant center was basically the initial fixture for any team that's trying to build a championship. Right? This is not, you know, again, new age basketball where everybody's out on the perimeter. They had Luke Longley, for crying out loud, Bill Wennington, Will Perdue. So for them to have just, I mean, obviously you make up for it when you have Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen on the same team, but Dennis Rodman was the perfect puzzle piece to get them those 72 wins.
Right.
So it's the first loss came to Orlando after they went 5-0. Second loss came to Seattle. And then third loss was Indiana. The Nuggets took out the Bulls. This was actually a famous game where the Nuggets beat the Bulls in that season due to Abdul Rauf torching them. Torching them that game. They lost to Phoenix, Miami, the Knicks. I know that was a blowout. It was 104-72.
Like I said.
Good memory, Ace.
Good memory,
I'm just
Ace.
saying. I'm just saying.
Toronto, which was a fluke. That was like a 1-point loss. The Hornets. And the last one was another one in Indiana. So Indiana took them out twice that season.
Right. So that was the only team that took them out more than one time.
Yep.
I mean, that is, it's an unheard of feat of basketball prowess, right? I mean, that's unheard of during these times. And again, he sharpened, and it was funny when they started talking about the Sonics. I'm rocking the Sonics, you know, RIP Sonics. Hopefully they come back to life at some point, but
I wish.
yeah. But yeah, every time they hand Michael Jordan an iPad now is going to be a new meme as far as I'm concerned.
Oh man.
Because the way
those are the greatest, I think.
The
way he looks at it is like,
yeah. And the way he just laughs off Gary Payton's like,
oh, that's the best.
Right? He's just like, oh, yeah, Gary, thanks. He called him the glove, right? He's like, oh, the glove. Yeah, the glove didn't give me any problems.
I had no problem with the glove.
Dude, when I was watching that segment, I was like, where's the talaga button? While Jordan was watching.
Bro, you have to make that meme.
I do.
That meme in the Philippines will blow up. I swear to God, it will blow up in the Philippines.
But again, the story he told about having dinner with Ahmad Rashad and then George Carl just kind of ignoring them, and goes back to the theme.
I
Which
don't
is, yeah, go ahead, Maris.
I don't understand why people keep doing that.
This is what I was gonna say. Is like, don't people know by now that this is, you don't poke the bear?
Yo, you're just gonna piss him off. If
Why?
just be nice. Like, so
Nice.
the same way, because Ace loves bringing up that Michael Jordan's a con man.
He is.
Nobody thinks to do the
Do the
same
same.
thing to him. Yeah,
Thank you, Maris. Thank you.
nobody thinks this. Again, I guess that's another testament to the greatness of Michael Jordan. Nobody's thinking, be his friend, soften him up a little bit. Maybe you'll have a better chance to win. Don't piss him off.
Right.
Because
Motivate him.
that's when he's gonna get 60 on you. Are you kidding?
And you're right. He's waiting for that small slight, however small it happens, how incrementally tiny that happens to be. In Michael Jordan's mind, every molehill is a mountain, right? For him, there's no such thing as too small of a slight.
That's a great analogy.
Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no such thing as, hey, it's too small. So, like I said, I'm going to go back to the Kerr point. He defended himself, but not many people can in this thing, right? Michael Jordan is, again, apex predator number one, and like you said, Maris, why poke at him? You know he wants to eat you. Why give him another reason to eat you? It makes no sense.
Right. And Gary said it, man. Mike ripped them in their ass. Pause.
Hoy bastos.
A lot of
that's the drop. That one.
A lot of allusions to prison culture. Scotty Burrell being, the shy, humble, like bitch, for lack of a better word. Needing to whip him into shape, et cetera, et cetera. So, all right, I'll stop.
Bastos talaga.
So I think all of it really culminated, right? Going back to the themes of this is like that motivation got him over the hump, got him back into the league. And I think that outpouring of emotion once they won that championship was indicative of what he was kind of feeling the whole time, which is, he's been missing his dad. His dad was his main motivation and the guy who was always by his side. And I think it allowed him to really show himself that. And I think, again, that outpouring of emotion, I remember that vividly, watching that post game of him just, breaking down in the training room. It really touched me because, again, for all of us, our dads are such an important part of our life. I can only imagine what it must be like to have that much scrutiny and to have the one guy who is, steadfastly on your side every single time, no matter what. Now, all of a sudden not be there. Right. So, you saw that, and you saw that human part of Michael Jordan, not the robotic Terminator Michael Jordan, but you saw that all of that weight kind of, he buckled under that pressure of the amount that he missed his dad.
I can't even, every time I see that too, that interview with Ahmad and then him in the locker room, I start to tear up.
I was tearing up. Yeah, I was tearing up tonight
because there's a whole point of you having the motivation to do what you're going to do and to actually accomplish it, on top of it being Father's Day, which also it always boggles my mind because I have that 96 championship video of the Bulls, and they showed that he won on Father's Day. It kind of always makes you think, like, they went 3-0. He's looking at the calendar. Father's Day's coming up. Maybe we just give the Sonics the next two games, and I'm gonna win this thing on Father's Day.
Right.
That's looking at the episodes tonight too. That's not far off from his think. I don't think it would be far off from his thinking to poetically go out and cap this thing off on Father's Day
at home.
Right.
At home.
Oh, yeah.
It was such a perfect. It's too perfect, right?
Yeah.
It's too perfect for it to not have been planned in my mind, at least subconsciously by him, because you don't get any of that emotion if they sweep the Sonics. If he doesn't win, if the Bulls don't win that game on Father's Day, that emotion, the added emotion of it, and the heaviness of that burden doesn't get as dramatically lifted off, I think,
Right.
as it did.
Yeah.
Which 96 to me in NBA, still one of the best seasons ever.
Yeah. Yeah, and these 2 episodes was the perfect arc surrounding James Jordan's impact on Michael. And to Maris's point about 1996 being like the best season for basketball, this will be a topic for another day. I mean, it was also the gateway to the next great generation of players that same summer, and that class, including none other than Kobe Bryant. But shout out to KRS-One Step Into the World
Oh yeah.
as the backdrop for like the 96 Bulls like arriving. That was like the one song that stood out. And there wasn't as much like throwback songs these 2 episodes as last week, but that was awesome.
Chef's kiss perfect. So okay, with that, again, we're at the penultimate episodes next week, right?
Yep, and I haven't seen these, so I'm gonna be in the same boat as you guys.
Okay.
Sweet. Awesome.
So I think we're starting to see the arc get down to where the core of this documentary is, which is that last season. And again, I think they're trying to bookend it with some key points during the earlier seasons. And I think now it's starting to crest into that last and final season. So I'm looking forward to it. Any last thoughts, Maris, from your side?
No, I think since episode 8 ends off on the tip-off from the Pacers series, which for all intents and purposes is the biggest scare I think that the Bulls dynasty had going into that last championship season, because we know that series went a very hard 7 games for the Bulls, and they hadn't been in a game 7 since the Knicks.
Right.
92, correct.
In 92. Well, technically 94 if you're counting with Jordan, 92. But I'm excited to see how this is going to end, and I think all the narrative beats that we were looking for have already been hit in these 8 episodes. So I think we're in for a doozy for the last, or hopefully we're in for a doozy for the last, not for episodes 9 and 10.
Ace, what about you? Last thoughts?
I'm just looking forward to the entertaining analysis of Brian Russell getting cooked next week. Right. And just want to shout out to my guy, Mark Benitez. I know he's acknowledged how much he enjoys this pod. So shout out to you. Keep listening. Tell your friends about us. That's all I got.
All right, guys. I appreciate everybody jumping on, listening to us. We started off this month not really asking for too much, and the growth on the listener side I think is great. I really appreciate everybody kind of tuning in and listening to us. For us, this is fun, so the fact that you guys can get anything from it, from listening to it, is great for us. So you appreciate it. Keep listening, and we'll be generating more content for you guys in the future. Appreciate it, guys. We'll see you later. Peace.
Thank you.
Peace.